Let me share a screen for my slides about contemporary economic issues, week 1, basic economics, which is useful for policy analysis. You can think of this as, what are some basics that I want us all to know for the purposes of saying what side of an issue is good? Like, how do you argue for one side being good? And some of that is subjective, and that's why I got your opinions last class. And here's, what makes a good policy? I asked you guys this, and you gave me some answers from previous classes, and here's me summarizing them in a lot of ways. Something that benefits a lot of people, or in fact, there's more benefit than harm, is a good. Something that's efficient is good. Something that improves the efficiency of our economy, or of something. People talked a little bit about fairness and equity. I think it was you, Nick, who said something about growth being equitable rather than just, we don't just care about the total economic growth that a policy promotes. If all of the gains are going to the top 1%, and the 99% are not getting any of the gains, that might actually be bad for the economy. So looking at somehow the equitableness of a policy could be important, and how effective it is. I don't think I put sustainability on there too, but I sort of believe that's important too, looking at it over time. And at the end of the lecture today, I think I'll have something about that in terms of present value. So those of you who've had any sort of finance classes before, even some economics classes probably talked about present value. And I think this is missing in some of our debates. We talk about something that costs $1 trillion now, or something that costs $1 trillion 10 years or 20 years from now. Those dollar amounts aren't all the same. And a present value is a way to compare things across time. Oh, I didn't have that on here, but yeah. And so I think economists are most often concerned of these concerns. The biggest one they have is efficiency, if you agree with me. So here's a simple way to think about efficiency: is not the average benefit versus the average cost of doing something, rather the marginal benefit, and comparing that to the marginal cost of doing something. Economists want everybody, if we could, to think of marginal benefits and marginal costs when you're considering doing something, rather than average. It's simply the more efficient way to think about it. It leads you more directly to an efficient outcome. I'll say that. I'll give you an example, I think. Oh no, first I had to talk about equity. Darn. Okay, later on we'll give an example of that. So first let's talk about equity. One definition I found of equity is the sense of the quality of being fair and impartial. Notice that it's not the same as equality. Equity, if you had to think of one word that is a synonym for equity, I would just say fair. How fair is something? But I'm curious if you think economists have the right to talk about equity in economic systems, whether the system itself is fair for all of the people who are participating in it. Is that something you should bring up, let's say, in your debates or in your paper? What do you think?
I mean, there's, trying to remember who said it, it might have been Piketty, said that economic structures are inherently amoral, meaning that they're not immoral or moral. And so if you want morality in an economic system, you have to impose it.
Interesting. So let me interpret that. Let me guess and say that your answer is yes, that economists should talk about something that involves morality within their economic system, because without it, you're saying nothing, but maybe it could be used as a sort of a moral guiding principle that says, introduce some notion of what's equitable as well as what's efficient. I think
Is
that's what I'm saying. Maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like how the Fed has a dual mandate with unemployment and inflation, you could
Mhm.
have a similar setup when you're looking at what constitutes good economic policy.
Okay.
is that up for economic or economists to decide though, or that seems like the idea of something that's fair and the morality of it, something that's communicated more by politicians, whereas the idea of something being fair is a very normative statement,
I totally
and
agree.
economists tend to focus on the positive, just the cause and effect. And so the idea of, something being fair or moral can be brought into the question, but is that up to the economist or are there others that do that kind of talking?
Yeah. Great question, because I think what is it Gibran? Gibran?
Yeah, Gibran.
Gibran is saying that their economists might believe something to be moral and fair, and somebody else disagrees with that person. And if you're an economist and you are writing up a proposal and analyzing a policy, and here are my conclusions, if those conclusions depend on something which is subjective and a matter of opinion, by the very nature, you're going to have a different conclusion than somebody else with different. And I do think that's a careful warning to say, don't um, don't be too moral. Don't be too um, certain about this is the right way to do things because of morality. So I agree. I take that point. However, I do think you can write something in a way that talks about equity in as an objective way as possible, right? And say something about the equality of opportunity. If you've designed something in a way that a certain class of people or actors in some economic system simply don't have an opportunity, it was never presented to them in the first place, that other people do, that becomes less about your opinion about what's subjective and more just it happens to be missing in this thing. I don't really have a good answer for this.
Well, I see what you're saying. So, like, as long as you're setting certain parameters
Yeah,
for equity and equality, then you can
yeah,
study it from a more objective standpoint.
yeah. Oh, by the way, I don't think equality is necessarily um, a goal of a lot of economics. They're not unless they're some maybe Marxist or some kind of more extreme heterodox economist is what they're called. Uh, Equality isn't the goal. It's it's both efficiency. Really, number one is efficiency, and then but right behind that maybe some concept of equity and sorry, Nick, like tying the idea of meritocracy to efficiency. Uh, I forget what that's in response to, but yeah, yeah. So notice here, my very last point is that there could be a trade-off, and let's acknowledge that there could be something which is more efficient but less equitable according to some definition of equity. And what's the right thing to do might not necessarily be whatever's the most efficient thing to do. If you somehow believe or can make an as objective argument as you can that there's a cost in terms of equity, perhaps uh, I would allow you to bring that up in one of your debates or one of your papers. If you want to talk about that, that's fine. But let's remember something that you can show more directly in terms of efficiency is probably the strongest argument you can make. Yeah, different ideas of what is fair. That's true. That could be an issue. That could be a problem. I don't have a great answer to tell you for what do I do if I have a different idea of what's fair than somebody else. It becomes politics. It becomes philosophy rather than economics. And I'm not teaching you that in this class. I'm not teaching you about political philosophy. I'm teaching you just economics. So you're allowed to, I'm giving you a little bit of a pass here, right? I'm not going to say wrong. You're being too normative. and not positive enough. Gibran brought this up, that you've probably been taught in other classes that you should focus on positive economics rather than normative economics. And the difference is positive economics is a description of the way things are. It's a description of theory and causation and directly observable results. Whereas normative economics focuses on what you think would be the best way to do it, what things should be like. It would be better, in my opinion, if we did it this way. And you've probably been taught in other classes, avoid normative statements and choose positive statements. In this class, I'm giving you a pass that says you're allowed to bring some normative statements into your arguments, but try to make them based on the most simplest, most core concept of fairness and equity that you can. And a good place to start is equality of opportunity. Some people will say that. Look at my definition, the quality of being fair and impartial. Impartial is a good word too, right? Something's partial if it favors one group over the other, for some particular reason. Impartial means it doesn't. It sort of treats everyone the same. Okay. I don't know how satisfying that was. I hope you don't really disagree with me, Gibran, because I'm really glad you brought up that point, that I don't think an economist should be a moral philosopher. Even though there were back in the 1700s, there really wasn't much of a difference between philosophy and economics. That's sort of the classical economists. We now live in an age where all mainstream economists are what we would consider neoclassical. And a neoclassical economist, I'm one of them, is somebody who uses economic theory and draws conclusions based on data and sort of an axiomatic structure for how all economics. Basically, it's a mathematicize. I don't know if that's a word. These classical concepts based on axioms, and say we want to start from the ground up and build a complete theory of how economics works, and use data to correct that theory wherever possible. That's basically the concept of neoclassical economists. And they don't, okay, let's go on. If anybody has any questions. What do you guys think of the pandemic shutdown? Started in 2020. Do you agree with it? Was it efficient? Was it equitable? Was it effective? This was pretty contentious, wasn't it? We've all been living through this pandemic, and I put this slide here because I think it's like a first crack at how do you make sense of what is the best thing to do in this case? Should we close all of our schools and restaurants and bars? Should we have these stay-at-home orders for non-essential workers? We did, especially between March and like June, July. We had some pretty strict shutdown orders, and then they got released, and then some of them came back. But think about it as an economist. Was it efficient to do that? How would you even start thinking about that? Was it efficient?
Well, there's no data to show like what would have been different. So how do you compare it? This is new. This is something we've never experienced before.
Good point. So we can't do an apples to apples comparison. Here's our economy with a shutdown. Here's our economy without a shutdown, right? Is what you're saying? Okay, but you can speculate, can't you?
But you don't know how bad it could have been. I mean, I guess if you sent everybody back to work at the same time at any given point during last year, and all of these new variants of COVID come around and we have to shut everything down again, is it worse? I mean, how do you compare that?
Yeah. So what do you think about the efficiency of it? We need a good definition of efficiency. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense. But are you arguing that it was more efficient to have the shutdown than to not have the shutdown?
I'm arguing that I can't answer that question.
Okay, fair enough. Well, let's all speculate then. What would have happened if we didn't have a shutdown, and compare that to what happened now that we did?
I think it would have been worse.
Would have been worse.
Because yeah, the transmission is high right now, but at the height of the pandemic, well, former high, people have been getting more sick, more people have been home, more deaths. I think the lockdown kind of added a buffer for things to get better, but then once the lockdowns were lifted, things got worse.
Okay, so how about for our economy now? I mean, it sounds awful to talk about the economy when people's life and it's a life and death issue for some people, especially the older, more vulnerable populations. This isn't just about, they didn't just care about how well the economy is doing. They care about saving their life. So maybe include the value of a life, and I don't know however you think about what makes something efficient or not efficient.
Like, for instance, like a gym, a
A gym.
small business,
Okay.
one person can basically infect the whole gym. And then that whole gym is going to be shut down because everyone else is sick. You can't really go to work with COVID.
So it sounds like you're arguing it was more efficient to have a shutdown.
More efficient, but it has to be done correctly. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Did anybody disagree or have a different point?
I think there's a
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm just thinking about the definition of efficiency. Like, how do you define efficiency here?
Great.
I mean, is it just the monetary terms? Is it just like economy, or does it include the health of the people? How do you define it? That's like the
Includes health.
question here.
I believe it should include the health of the people and the money and everything. You know what economists use to talk about everything? They use utility. You're familiar with this concept of utility. It's a way
Yeah.
it's the way to quantify your well-being just overall. Right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess that's my answer. If you ask me what's efficient to do, I'd have to look at how this policy, in this case we're talking about a shutdown, affects the utility of everybody involved. What sort of costs are being paid by people? I'm sure there are some small business owners that were furious with Governor Northam for his shutting down, making stay-at-home orders in March of 2020. They probably thought, "How dare you? You're hurting my livelihood here." And their utility was decreased, even if it was wrong for them to think that, because it's very possible that by having a shutdown, if it had worked, if we had gotten control of the virus sooner, then businesses could have opened again sooner. But they didn't. And so it's it's even possible that even for that person who was very upset at the shutdown, even they may have been better off with that. But let's ignore that, the sort of mistakes that people make when evaluating their own utility. Because how do you evaluate mistakes when people think they're the wrong thing? I think it's better to just think of what is the effect on their utility. And that's tough. So because you can't measure utility very well, can you? Utility is a fake number. It doesn't really exist. If I told you my utility is equal to 10, what does that mean? What is 10? 10 what? The truth is, it only matters when I compare it to other things. If I say my utility for, a cup of coffee is 10, my utility for a piece of a cookie is 5, and I'm like, which one do I want? Utility tells me that I would rather have the coffee because it gives me utility of 10 instead of 5. So it's a relative thing. It compares this way. It can still be quantified when you have some unit that you can sort of transfer it to. And oftentimes we use dollars for that, even though it's not perfect, right? So if I told you like how valuable is a cup of coffee to me in terms of dollars, and I measured it, that would tell me something about the benefit of this coffee. Or, how much would I want to be compensated for if someone were to take it away? So sometimes economists will use that as a shortcut for measuring utility. I can't measure utility, but I can estimate it based on what is the equivalent value in dollars of this thing that you have? And you could do that with the bars too, or the restaurants. A restaurant owner is told they have to shut down, and what sort of penalties does that cause them? If you could somehow quantify that in terms of dollars, maybe that says something to the total cost. Yeah.
How much of utility, like if you're just gonna like try and vaguely quantify utility, how much of that is based off of having symmetrical and perfect information? Because if you have like large amounts of information asymmetry, as we saw with disinformation around COVID-19, then that could lead people to make completely different calculations about things that we would assume would have a really high utility value, such as staying alive.
Yeah.
And so then your risk tolerance, there's no common basis for determining that. And then you're not able to really get any concrete analysis done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, oh, somebody's got, oh, is that you? I think you're right that there is a limit to the concreteness of your analysis if you're going to include all of these things about misinformation or misunderstanding of probabilities, for example. People don't understand probabilities very well. And they certainly don't price risk in a way that is consistent. So I would say let's not do that. If we're going to argue something is efficient, let's try to think of some way to estimate the true effect on the utilities of these people as best as you can. I agree it's not perfect. And I don't expect you to do anything detailed in mathematical analysis like this. I really just want to give you some idea of how economists might think of these sorts of issues. And utility is a good way. Marginal utility. How much extra benefit do I get from this, or how much extra cost do I get from this, is a good way to think of whether or not something's efficient. What do I say? Virginia had a 3-phase reopening plan, which culminated July 1st. And I was wondering, do you agree with the reopening? Should we have stayed with the shutdown? Because actually it got worse there, and really it got way worse starting Thanksgiving, Christmas time, and even right now it's still pretty high. So somebody in the government had to weigh these costs and benefits of reopening the economy, and it kind of seemed like the reopening won. They may have made a mistake, but you can see how there's some efficiency choices here. Maybe it wasn't very equitable. I sort of think it's possible that efficiency was more of a factor than equity in those cases, based on what we observed. Let's go on. Here's a water fountain example. Imagine a town, and they're trying to decide how many water fountains to build. And remember how I said you could quantify utility? What we really care about is utility, but you don't really know how much utility somebody gets from having a water fountain available. But what you could do is try to survey them and say, what's the most you'd be willing to pay for a water fountain, and get that in terms of dollars. And then you get that for all of you estimate that for an entire city. And then you say, okay, if we were to put one water fountain in the optimal place for this entire city, how much total benefit would that give to the residents? And let's say somebody did this analysis and got $2,500 for one, $4,500 for two, $6,000 for three. If someone were to ask you based on this, what is the efficient number of water fountains? Do you think you could give them some kind of answer? Does anybody want to try to answer? Or is it a trick question? It sort of doesn't make sense, does it? What's missing?
The number of people?
Number of people? Okay.
Demand?
Oh, so this is kind of demand, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we should actually, I'm glad you brought this up. We should think of demand as the benefit of something. I was going to say that in 10 minutes anyway, so the fact that you brought up now is fine.
What about the cost Or the
Cost.
marginal cost, because we can see the decreasing marginal benefit.
Exactly. If you want to talk about efficiency, you've got to think about benefits and costs, and what is sort of the level that maximizes the benefit minus costs in some way. So without cost, you can't answer this. So let's, how many water fountains should this town build? The answer is we have no idea unless we know something about costs. Okay, so I'm giving you an answer. What if the costs are $2,200 per fountain? Now can you answer this? I want the efficient number of water fountains.
I'd probably go back to demand. What are people saying? What do they want?
So this chart gives you the total benefit for a water fountain, and that's equivalent to demand. Sorry, this is free water. Right? I chose water instead of Gatorade or something that you had to pay for. This is a water fountain that anyone can come and use for free. So the residents of the town don't have to pay for it. I mean, their taxes pay for it. The question is, if you're the government of this town, how many water fountains should you build?
2.
That's Nick who says 2.
2.
2.
I agree too.
2.
How do you get 2?
It costs $2,200 to put in the third fountain, but you only get $1,500 in additional utility. Whereas, I guess the answer would be 1 because you only get an extra $2,000 in benefit for adding the second one versus a cost of $2,200. So 1 would be the answer.
I'm glad you went so that I didn't have to. You guys hear what he said? He first thought it was 2, and if you look at that number, that's kind of enticing. Like, oh, you can get $4,500 a benefit. That's way better. Or no, sorry. If you look at the average benefit of 2 versus 2,200, it's still positive, right? 4,500 is better than 2 times 2,200, 4,400. There's still more benefit than cost with 2 fountains. If you take this number 2,200 multiply by 2, you get 4,400. So with 2 fountains, you still have more benefit than cost. But that's not what you should look at. You should look at the marginal benefits. And the marginal benefit from going from 1 to 2 is only 2,000, whereas the marginal benefit to going from marginal cost going from 1 to 2 is 2,200. So that's why the answer to this, the efficient level, is 1. I want to give you another example here to test you. Somebody other than Nick has to answer this. What if the costs are $600 per fountain? Now what would be the efficient number of water fountains if the cost were $600 per fountain?
Five.
How'd you get 5? Gibran's right.
Because once you go from 5 to 6, the marginal benefit's only 500. So
Perfect. So he's not like calculating each one and multiplying the fountains by the cost and then subtracting it to find out the total benefit. He's not doing that. He only was looking at the marginal benefit of each one. And if you look at 5 to 6, the marginal benefit is only 500 and the cost is 600. So that's what tells you should stop at 5. So the answer to the first question is 1. The answer to the second question is 5. The point of this exercise is to say efficiency happens when when you're providing a public good, for example, you want to increase the level up until the point where the marginal cost becomes higher than the marginal benefit. Then you should stop. A lot of times this is written as marginal benefit equals marginal cost. However, in this example, I gave you these integers. Therefore, you're not going to find a point. You can't have 5.5 water fountains or something like that. But if you could, if it were continuous, then please think of it as marginal benefit equals marginal cost. That's a good approximation. Okay, thank you. How do you measure the benefit to society? This is not easy to do. Do you want, what is it that people want? Food, shelter? Do they want universal health care? What's the benefits to them? Back when I was, a long time ago, we had a vice presidential candidate named Sarah Palin, and she was famous for giving away money for a bridge to nowhere, but actually she took the money. But you know, what do people want? How do you compare what people want or don't want? Economists generally don't like to talk about wants. Instead, you talk about preferences. You know, do you want a glass of milk? Do you want to go to the store and buy some bread? Do you want a new Tesla car? You know, Model 3 or something. Sure, yeah, I want a Tesla. That's not what matters. In terms of what we're going to talk about and what economists think about, it's not what you want or what you need. It's what are your preferences? Because preferences are actually about trade-offs. If I could have this or this, which would I prefer? You know, if I could spend $40,000 on a Tesla or spend that same $40,000 on college or something, you know, paying off my college loans. There's a trade-off there, and that sort of determines what exactly what benefits I most want to receive. And utility functions exactly do this. Utility functions are representations of preferences. In other words, like I said before, if you have a higher utility for A than for B, that means I prefer A to B. And if you use dollars in there too, like, would you prefer? Here's an iPhone. What would you rather have, $1,000 or this iPhone? Talking about that preference, you know, $1,000 worth of consumption elsewhere, or an iPhone. If I get that information from somebody that they prefer the iPhone to the $1,000, then we know better idea for how much benefit they get from the iPhone. You see what I'm saying? Whereas if they would prefer the money to the iPhone, that means they get less benefit from that iPhone than 1,000. What's my point? Utility is a representation of preferences, and utility determines demand. That's how neoclassical economists think of demand. They think of it as they think of it as the choices you make as a consumer in order to maximize your utility function. Whatever choices you choose, you could buy, you know, everyone here presumably spends some of their money on housing. Maybe you rent an apartment, maybe you live in the dorms at VCU, maybe you own your own home, but you made a decision about how much money you wanted to spend on your housing, given your budget. You know, I want to spend $500 a month on my housing, and that's it. You also made a decision about what to spend on food and entertainment and clothing and transportation, and all of the ways that you budget all of your money are done. The assumption of neoclassical economics is you chose that distribution of your spending to maximize your utility. And because utility represents preferences, and preferences represent how much you want something, how badly you want something, then we can go straight from how much benefit you get from the thing from demand. Because demand is a representation of all of this stuff. There's a line from demand to the benefit that you receive of the thing. Sorry, I'm spending a lot of time on this. My point is that it's a bit of a shortcut to say we can look at what sort of demand there are for products, for everything in the economy, and then say by maximizing the amount of trade surplus people get with these products, we can maximize the benefits that can possibly be accrued to the people in this particular economy. I might be able to say this better on my next slide. Let's take a look. No, maybe not. Okay, so let me summarize it here. Aggregate demand represents the benefit. What I mean by that is, if you take the demand of everybody in a society for a particular product and add it up, that's a good representation of how much benefit we as a society get from that product that's being produced. So I know it's not perfect, but sometimes you hear economists talk about this goal of maximizing trade surplus in an economy, trying to achieve the competitive equilibrium price and quantity for something. And it doesn't just come out of nowhere. It comes from this idea that that is a way to maximize the total benefit that is achieved in a market. Okay, I gotta chat here. Oh, how crucial is this to the assumption that consumers are rational in the aggregate? Okay, you're right. So if people are buying products that actually don't make them happy, I would agree. This is the assumption sort of breaks down. What's the benefit to society of what was like, I don't know, Candy Crush, right? People spend money on Candy Crush or other sort of weird apps where it feels like they just get bored and they start to get addicted to something and they spend money without even realizing that they've spent a lot of money on some particular app. Does that mean that's the benefit to society? That Candy Crush is providing all of this benefit to society. I know it's not Candy Crush now, it's changed what people spend money on, but unfortunately, we as economists have to say, yeah, I guess so. I guess that's what they wanted to spend the money on. It's still as good as we can of a measure of the true benefit to society of that thing. Yes, there are issues involved, but it seems like a good way. You want to argue, here's a policy which will maximize the benefit to society, and show that it actually allows the market to provide more of this particular good at a price that's close to the equilibrium price. That in itself is an argument that says it's increasing the welfare of people in the economy, because people who want this good can get it. People who want to sell this good can sell it. And the more trade that happens in that way, the better off people are. Sounds like I'm saying free markets are always the best. Of course not. We'll talk about market failures. We have time. We should have time. Let me go on here. I still haven't answered this question about efficiency. What does it mean to be efficient? I gave you the water fountain example, and that's a good way to quantify marginal benefit and marginal cost. But here are some more really, I got 4 definitions of efficiency on this slide. I have what I call the colloquial definition of efficiency, because people who aren't economists, just everyday people who talk about the word efficiency, usually this is what they mean when they say efficiency. And it's really not a bad definition at all. What they usually mean is something is efficient if it uses all the resources in the best way without waste. This is ignoring utility and all that other stuff, but actually it's a pretty good definition of efficiency. For example, if you're sharpening your axe and you're chopping wood, how often do you sharpen your axe? It's a material that you have, it's a goal that you have, and if you never sharpen your axe, that's not efficient. You're not being efficient with your time, because then you're slower at chopping each wood. Same thing, if you always sharpen your axe, you're wasting time sharpening, because what you really want to do is chop the wood. So I'm okay with this, using this definition of efficiency when we're talking about using resources. Another resource you could use are materials themselves. How are these resources being used in a way that will actually benefit people the most? if you're making wood, do you turn it into furniture, or do you just take that wood and burn it in a fire? You know, what's the efficient way to use your material? Of course, it depends on what you want. How much benefit would you get from having a chair? You know, you could use this wood and build a chair, and then you have something to sit on. Great, you have one more chair to sit on. How much benefit does that give you to have that chair? Or you could just use that wood, chop it up, and burn it in the fire. You get some heat and warmth from the fire. There's really no way to answer about how you're using materials efficiency unless you also think about what sort of benefits can be accrued from the creation, the production of those materials. Okay, let's talk about the next definition of efficiency, which is Pareto efficiency. What that means is no Pareto improvement is possible. If we're currently in a situation where there's no Pareto improvement possible, we couldn't change it in a way to make somebody better off and no one worse off. That's a pretty good definition of efficiency, right? Because although let's call it Pareto efficiency, not just efficiency. Let's use the adjective Pareto. It's named after an economist, Pareto, because you know, maybe things aren't perfect, but there's nothing else we could have done that wouldn't make somebody worse off. And I sort of think, well, I don't know. Let's think of allocating. I often use pizza for this. I don't know why. Like if I had a pizza with 8 slices on it, and you know I was hungry for 6 of those slices of pizza. I have 8 slices of pizza, and I haven't eaten in a long time, and I want to eat 6 of them. But there's some hungry people there too, and I say, well, I'm gonna eat 6 of these slices of pizza. The other 2, I'll just give away. And you know, let's say we're actually meeting in class, and I usually use this example when there's people in front of me, and it's a better example. But like, yeah, these hungry people in class are like, we'll take one of those slices, one of the 2 slices I don't eat, they'll eat. But then the other 6 I eat. And there's a bunch of hungry people there who get no pizza. The question is there a Pareto improvement in this example? I'm going to stop sharing so we can have like a bit of a discussion about this. Get what I'm saying? I'm very hungry. I got a pizza. I'm eating 6 of the slices, and there's 2 left over, and I just give them randomly to 2 people in the class. But really, everyone in the class is hungry. Is that Pareto efficient? What do you think? Nick says no. Remember the assumptions is that I'm very hungry and I wanted 6 slices and I'm going to eat all 6. The 7th and 8th I don't want. They were just like nothing for me, so I give them away. I can't save it. For some reason, there's no way to save the pizza, so I just give them away. And you say it's not a Pareto efficient outcome. Can you explain why?
Given your review of the assumptions, I'm going to rescind my answer, because if you're that hungry and you give away another slice of pizza, you're making yourself worse off, and you're not at Pareto then.
Right. You guys get that? Like let's say I would be very happy with just 5 slices. That's a lot of pizza. I could eat 5 slices and be very full. If I gave away one of those slices, you might think that would make more sense. It would be fair, especially if it weren't my pizza. Let's say that we all walked into a classroom and there was a pizza sitting there, and I just grabbed it. I was like, finders keepers. I'm gonna get this pizza. I'm gonna eat 6 of these slices. I'll give away the other 2. Nick at first was thinking that's not efficient because there's other hungry people. You could spread the pizza out a little bit more fairly, and that would be better. But it's not a Pareto improvement. That's what I'm teaching you right now. What does it mean to have a Pareto improvement? It means no one can be made worse off. And if I wanted 6 slices and now I can only have 5, I've been made slightly worse off. And I want to stay with this example for a bit. What if we include money into the situation. Let's say I got the pizza and it's my pizza. It's my right to eat it if I want. Can we think of an improvement that would involve money? What do you think? Let's say the rest of the class is very hungry and they would be willing to pay like $4 for a slice of pizza. Maybe not, because you could get some. They'd be willing to pay at least $1, at least $1 for a slice of pizza. They would be happy to pay that. And for me, you know, the 6th slice that I eat, I just barely wanted that. I didn't really care. The 5th slice, I just barely wanted to. Can you think of a Pareto improvement there?
Can we do auction?
An auction. That's interesting. Lauren, you said this, right?
Yes.
I think what you're doing is jumping ahead to like the most efficient allocation of the pizza, right? I was just talking about any sort of anything that would be better. And you know, just choosing a price like $1 and saying, hey, does anybody want to? I'll sell this pizza to anybody for $1. And there's people out there who are like, yeah, I'll take it for $1. That means I have less pizza, but I got $1. So in Lauren's more extreme example, I auctioned the pizza for as high of a price as I can get. I'm assuming you meant like an English auction. An English auction is one where, that's the one we're most familiar with, where there's an auctioneer and there's a price and the price just keeps going up until no one else is willing to raise it, and then that's the transaction price. If I did this, I would be able to extract the most money I could out of you guys. Unless you colluded to keep the price down, which I imagine you wouldn't. Either way, either Lauren's idea of the auction or just my idea was choosing a fixed price, like $1, and selling it. That would actually be a Pareto improvement, wouldn't it? What do you guys think? If I sold, if there were, let's say there were 4 people who wanted the pizza more than $1 and they had $1 with them. Let's pretend this is like the year 2000 and we still used cash for transactions instead of Venmo. Or maybe you just Venmo me the $1, who knows? It's not a Pareto efficient outcome for me to eat all the 6 of the slices anymore. Once we introduce trade, and this is an important concept for economists, that trade in general is good. Not only is it good, it can cause a Pareto improvement. In fact, so I'm going to sound really like a libertarian here. Forgive me for sounding so libertarian, but there's this concept that I will relay, which is that all trade that occurs without deception coercion or fraud. Those are the 2 things. All trade that occurs without coercion and without fraud is beneficial to both parties. Would you agree with this? Oh, Nick says no. Remember, there's no coercion, so I'm not forcing you to do it. There's no fraud in the sense that I'm not deceiving you in any way. What you're getting is actually, you know, I'm not, you know, snake oil salesman. That's not what's happening. But if trade occurs, you simply wouldn't. The fact that you're willing to trade implies that you're made better off by the trade. Would you agree with that? I'm sorry, Nick. I want to use you as my skeptic. Can I? Would you agree with that? That you wouldn't have participated if it didn't make you better off?
I'd say you wouldn't have participated if you didn't think it would make you better off. But I guess then you start looking at short run, long run. I guess the question is making you better off, is that like a static thing? Are we just looking at this one individual moment in time without any regard for the future?
Okay. Yes, I think I was thinking of it in a static way.
And are we only looking at the 2 people involved in the trade?
Yes. Yes, we are. We are only looking at those 2 people involved. Are you thinking of externalities? Perfect. I love that. I mean, that should be your answer to any libertarian who's making this argument that you should always have free trade, free markets, zero intervention because trade is always good. All you have to do is say what Charlotte said, which is, what about third parties who are going to be affected by this trade? And, you know, they don't want it. You know, if we're talking about carbon emissions in our atmosphere, every single person who, you know, breathes air and cares about the climate is affected by emitting carbon into the atmosphere, but they're not involved in this transaction if you're, you know, if you're building, if you're, anyways. So yes, that's a good retort. But for just for the purposes of counting something as a Pareto improvement, I sort of do agree that a trade that's without coercion or fraud pretty much counts as a Pareto improvement, unless there's some externalities. Yes. So what's my point? Oh, Pareto efficiency. Pareto efficiency can occur where, like, we're in the situation with the pizza. If I eat 6 slices and don't give any of them away, it's still not Pareto efficient if there was a opportunity to trade and we just chose not to do it. If I could have either auctioned or sold off the pizza and I chose not to do it, or we were prevented from doing it for some reason, right? Maybe the government says, well, it's illegal to sell pizza in a classroom, and therefore I don't sell it. The government does make it illegal to sell a lot of things. For example, organs. In this country, you're not allowed to sell a kidney or other organs, and some countries you are. And there's an interesting debate about the efficiency and the well-being. Like, what effect does that actually have on the market for organs?
Don't they ban it because, one, it could be an illegal trade, two, because it kind of puts people with more money at a higher advantage of getting an organ than a lower, some with lower income?
There seem to be, there are a lot of reasons to make it illegal to sell an organ. And probably the fear of, you know, some really shady transactions, I think is one of them. But I'm just want to get this concept of Pareto improvement and Pareto efficiency that says it actually could be tied to trade in some way, where, because if trade is possible and it doesn't happen, that's not Pareto efficient. Like in the case where I ate all the pizza instead of selling it. Okay. Now I want to talk, oh, maybe I should go back to the, oh, I got some chats. I'm sorry, unless your utility curve values the pizza more than, I don't know if I get it, Nick, unless your utility curve says you value the pizza way more than the money. Yeah. So like if the 6th pizza, I meant to say it's like only worth a few cents to me. It's like, it's not very valuable. Then I should trade it with you because it's more valuable to you. And then someone asked, is there a difference between you selling the pizza for $1 to someone who is super hungry or selling it for $1 to someone who is barely hungry? Are both Pareto improvements? The answer, McKinsey, is no, they're not both Pareto improvements. It's only a Pareto improvement if I sell it to somebody who is very hungry, who wants it for more than $1. If somebody obviously doesn't want it for $1 and I sell it to them anyway, then it's not a Pareto improvement because they've been made worse off. Maybe you're asking, does it matter to whom I sell the pizza? And I would say, I guess not, because as long as I'm selling it to somebody who wants it more than $1, it's still a Pareto improvement. Okay. I have some time. Oh, I'm running out of time. I always go too slow here. Where are we? Current slide. Let's talk about supply and demand. I've already talked about this. Economic surplus is the area between a supply curve and a demand curve. And if you think of supply as being how much, at what price people would be willing to sell something, and demand is at what price people would be willing to buy something, just like we had with the pizza, that difference between how much it's worth to you and how much it's worth to me is a measure of what we call economic surplus. And efficiency is going to happen where that economic surplus is maximized. For the same reason as in the water fountain example, we wanted a place where marginal benefit equals marginal cost. Well, you could think of demand as being the marginal benefit to society, and you could think of supply as being the marginal cost to society. Where are those two things equal? At the competitive equilibrium. If you remember from your microeconomic class that you should have taken, the competitive equilibrium is defined at the point where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded, and therefore the area between the two curves is maximized. That area is known as trade surplus or economic surplus. So once again, we're thinking of equilibrium as a shortcut to see where can we maximize these sorts of benefits. Just like in the pizza example, you know, if we didn't just think about me as a seller of pizza and you as a buyer of pizza, we thought about everybody that could possibly sell pizza and put them in the supply curve, everybody that could possibly buy pizza and put them in the demand curve, and put those together to form a competitive equilibrium. We've got it. We've got the point that is already Pareto efficient, because there's no more transactions that would occur that would benefit somebody, benefit both parties. At least that's a standard argument. And that's this argument that I have here. The economically efficient outcome is competitive equilibrium because the surplus is maximized. All possible gains from trade are realized. Marginal benefits from consuming are equal to the marginal cost of producing. And I think it's worth it to remind you of this concept of deadweight loss. You guys know what deadweight loss is? Deadweight losses are gains from trade that did not occur. So in the pizza example, if you know, I just chose not to sell you the pizza and you were unable to buy it, there would be some deadweight loss there because we could have engaged in trade and benefited, but we didn't. So there'll be a few times I think we can bring up deadweight losses when we talk about taxes or what else? Certain types of regulations, or maybe even, yeah, we'll see. Just a few more minutes. Let me go back to this. Where does it keep going there? Oh, there it is. Nope. Current slide. Okay, I'm ready to talk about market failure now. A market failure is when markets do not achieve an efficient outcome. It doesn't mean, you know, a lot of people think it means markets are failing in the sense that they disappear. There's no market at all, or markets fail in that everything that the market is doing is bad. That's not what it means. It's just a general term for when a market does not achieve an efficient outcome. And there can be lots of reasons for that. First one that I would like to point out are externalities. This is what Charlotte said. Anytime there's a cost or benefit received by a third party, then this point of the competitive equilibrium actually could stop being efficient. Why? Because the competitive equilibrium is a way to maximize, is set marginal benefit equal to marginal cost of the people inside the market. But let's say you have some external costs, those are not being factored in. And therefore it's actually not efficient to choose the competitive equilibrium, price and quantity, when there's an externality. It's just something that we'll need to think about in the future for what is the case for intervention. If there's an externality, there's a case for intervention. Let's look down here to this bullet point. What should you do when there's an externality in a market if you want it to be more efficient? The answer, quite simply, is to internalize the externality. In other words, force the people who are making these transactions to reckon with the fact that they're causing the externality somehow. One way to do it is with taxes. If you make people pay taxes in a way that's commensurate with the costs that they are imposing on other people, you actually can make the market be more efficient. Another way to do it is with establishing property rights. And a good way to internalize an externality is to give people some kind of right to avoid these costs. And therefore, if you want to impose the cost on them, you have to pay them for it. Like a good example would be, I'm thinking of the fracking regulation, where they might actually have to pay people to do fracking near them, and it seems like a kind of a sad example, because I think what happened in a lot of these cases, people would say, okay, you can do this fracking on my property or next to my property, but it didn't quite realize exactly what were some of the effects. But in theory, if you allow people to trade based on who has the right to pollute, for example, and they come to some agreement, that is another way to internalize the externality. It's sort of a less interventionalist way to come to some sort of agreement. Running low on time here. Okay, so let's talk about what we'll do in this class moving forward. I do want to have maybe our first quiz before our first homework. And what sort of stuff could I ask you about on the quiz? I think it'll just be very related to these slides I have on policy evaluation. And that is, what does it mean to be equitable? What does it mean to be efficient? There's a, I think next week I will finish up these slides and tell you about expected utility. Expected utility is just a simple way to think about decisions under uncertainty. And then present value is a good way to think about benefits and costs that happen over a long period of time. And then will we talk about regressions and establishing causality? I think we'll probably skip that. I think we won't have time for that. But the different definitions of efficiency, we'll talk about that as well. And I might ask you about that on the quiz. And that's Pareto efficiency. There's another type of efficiency I haven't told you about yet. It's called Kaldor-Hicks. And we'll talk about that next week. I still need to ask you to sign up for debates, but let's do that next week too, because I feel like some people may still join the class or drop the class before that, and we're not going to have our first debate until 2 weeks from now. So I expect to have our first quiz maybe a week from now, but our first debate 2 weeks from now. And I will basically ask for volunteers, for people willing to go early, willing to go first. Now, it's good for you. You'll get it over with. And then we'll come up with a whole schedule for the whole semester. But look for that next week. We're not ready to do it now yet. I got a chat here. Do we search for an ideal topic debate, or are you providing a list of topics? I will provide a list of topics. If you want to see them right now, you can. But I mean, you can think of, here, how can I share this? There you go. So here's a list of some things I would like to debate this semester. I think the first one should be the COVID-19 stimulus. President Biden has a plan called the American Rescue Plan. That's a $1.9 trillion stimulus. I imagine probably most of us will be for, but if we get somebody against it, that might be a good debate to start off with, somebody who's for and against that, and then these other ones too. I have them organized by what subject we are talking about, and then what issue it involves, and then the specific motion that you'll be for or against. So I don't think we'll do it now. I think we'll do it later. I mean, if somebody wants to say right now that they're willing to do on February 11th to debate either for or against the stimulus, the COVID stimulus plan, maybe let me know, but the rest of them are far enough into the future that I want to wait. Okay. You guys have any questions? First quiz will be February 4th, and the first debate will be February 11th, and it will be about whether or not we should do this COVID stimulus plan. No questions? I mean, if not, I will.
Are the slides on Blackboard?
They are, yeah.